cheered by the party faithful as he arrived in newly won Tory territory. The location, Tony Blair's old constituency of Sedgefield, is likely to rub salt into the wounds of Labour activists, as will the roll call of constituencies once red, now blue.
I want to thank all the people of Sedgefield, of Bishop Auckland, of Stockton South, Darlington, where my ancestors come from, it turns out.
Paul Howell, the Conservative Party candidate, is hereby elected.
Labour saw a whopping 17% drop in its vote in Sedgefield. The coal mines are long since shut in this part of the world, jobs and investment in short supply. The Conservatives made election promises to improve transport links, build new hospitals and beef up police numbers. The Prime Minister repeated those promises today, but with little extra detail. And he thanked those former Labour voters who helped secure his historic victory.
I understand how big a step that is for some people, for some families, and we are going to repay their trust. We are going to deliver on the things that matter to them. And yes, of course, it's about getting Brexit done, but it's also about the NHS, it's about public services, and it's about a basic view of the country that it is going to be better off if you have one nation conservatism.
North of the border, the SNP were celebrating their own landslide. Nicola Sturgeon urging the Tories to wake up to the reality that they lost the election in Scotland, at least. Labour is still in a state of shock about its catastrophic performance, but the blame game has already started and the search for a new leader.
Labour leader,
we don't. I'm still in a period of mourning. We need to be able to have a chance to stop and think. Okay.
But speculation is already rife on who will take over. Emily Thornberry is one of 4 members of the shadow cabinet being touted. The others are Keir Starmer, Rebecca Long-Bailey and Angela Rayner. Then there are those firmly outside the inner circle, like Wigan MP Lisa Nandy, Jess Phillips, the MP for Birmingham, who says Labour has been going wrong for the last decade, and YVETTE Cooper, who was in Tony Blair's cabinet.
The new leader will come in place, appoint the shadow cabinet. I won't be part of that shadow cabinet. That's, I've done my bit. In those seats that we've lost, it's about listening to people. What was it? And I think it wasn't just Brexit. I think it was a long history of maybe 40 years of neglect, and them saying to politicians, you never listened to us and you've allowed our communities to be run down in this way.
Many of those communities are now represented by a Tory rather than a Labour MP. They start their new jobs on Tuesday, with the Prime Minister well aware if they're to keep their seats, they have to deliver on promises, and soon.
Well, with me now is the former Conservative MP, Ed Vaizey. He decided to step down at this election. Ed Vaizey, a former Etonian Prime Minister, cheered an ex-mining country, with his first name, in a place where they still loathe Margaret Thatcher. You didn't see that coming, did you?
I certainly didn't see the scale of Boris's victory. The last time I was in this studio, I did say he'd get a majority with about 30. It's the first time I've almost called an election right in about 20 years. But it is absolutely phenomenal. I think it's going to be seismic and potentially game-changing. I mean, I have always said about Boris Johnson, people forget he won in a Labour city in London twice. He was the difference between Leave and Remain. He has something about him that people really reach out to. And I think the early signs are as well that he recognises there is a great opportunity here for him and the Conservatives.
But that opportunity also has a cost. I mean, he's got to throw money at the problem. He's up, in the north today. He's thanking people. He's talking about things like mojo. He's trying to be as enthusiastic as he always is. But what would it actually take to satisfy those people who've gone against a lifetime tradition to vote Tory?
Well, I mean, I think there are 2 things to take account of. First of all, there is, I mean, I used to tease Boris Johnson a bit when I came on programmes like this by describing him as continuity Cameron, but it might be more accurate to say it could be a bit of continuity Osborne, because it was George Osborne who set up the Northern Powerhouse, who identified the needs of a lot of northern communities in terms of what sound like very boring things but are vitally important, like transport infrastructure, to knit these towns together. I think the second thing you've got to remember is that the Tory MPs who won in those seats were not people like me, not Tory careerists who went for the safe seat and knew what they were doing. They're local people representing their communities who didn't necessarily expect to be elected in this landslide. And I think they're going to very much change the tone of the Conservative Party, and they are going to be very strong advocates for their communities.
So the party has shifted further north, but is it also now an English nationalist party?
Well, look, Boris has, he deserves all the plaudits for this really tremendous victory, but with any victory come risks as well, and he has 2 or 3 in his in tray, and one of those is clearly the Union. It's clearly Scotland with the clear victory for the SNP there and how he works with them, but also Northern Ireland. You've got to be aware, obviously, with the rise of the nationalists overtaking the Unionists. Those are, and I'm sure that he will be mindful of the need to have policies that draw in those 2 countries and regions.
He's talked a lot about healing the divisions of Brexit. How's he going to do that?
Well, I do, again, going back to my teasing and cliche of continuity Cameron, I mean, I think he is a centrist politician. I would almost say he will now perhaps be even a centre-left Conservative Prime Minister, driven perhaps by some of the people who have been elected. These are people who don't need to be embarrassed about being MPs in North because they come from their communities and they know their communities. They don't need to be embarrassed to be Northern Conservatives, if you like, but they will fight for their communities. But I think Boris is not shy about spending money. I think there is one key point I would say, which is people like Dominic Cummings, you have to remember, worked with Michael Gove on education reform. Michael Gove got a lot of brickbats for those reforms. But we've now seen with these what are known as the PISA rankings, British schools moving up the rankings. So they do feel passionately about the communities that have been left behind, in the way that Michael felt passionately about the kids that were left behind in schools. So you should remember that there is a passion and a drive at the centre of Downing Street really to make a difference, not just because of political strategy or opportunity.
And you mentioned his name. Is Dominic Cummings now the man in charge, really?
Well, I think, Dominic Cummings has many faults, not least an interminably long blog, but you can't really argue with someone who's delivered an astonishing result with
And he cares about the North, doesn't he?
And now an astonishing election result. And he's a radical, and he's a 21st century version, if you like, of the great 70s radical thinkers who transformed conservatism. And I think he and his colleagues, who are a tight-knit group, will be a great driving force. Whether they can do it in a way that brings the country together rather than is too confrontational waits to be seen.
Ed Vaizey, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining us now from Nottinghamshire is the former Labour MP, Gloria De Piero, who stepped down at this election as well. Her old constituency was won by the Tories on Thursday. Thanks for coming on the programme, Gloria. Now, the election was actually won by a man called Lee Anderson, who is a former miner and who used to work for you. That must have hurt, that he won for the Tories.
Look, I'm devastated about what happened on Thursday night. The seats that we lost on Thursday night, they weren't just numbers. They literally were the parliamentary constituencies of our hearts and our souls. People didn't vote for us. Basically, the people that we were founded to represent really do not like the Labour Party. And what makes me so angry is that these warning signs were coming. The warning signs have been coming, not for 40 years, that's ridiculous, John McDonnell. We had majorities of 20-odd thousand in this constituency under the last Labour government. But last time, and the time before, actually, I'm surrounded by former mining communities. Sherwood, Amber Valley, Broxtowe, they went Tory in 2010. Last time, Ashfield got the biggest swing to the Tories, Bolsover the second biggest swing. Right. We lost Mansfield, we lost Stoke, lost North East Derbyshire. Why did nobody heed those warning signs then?
But they were there, weren't they?
Heed them, we compounded them.
Right, but the numbers, the unfavourability ratings for Jeremy Corbyn were hardly a state secret, right? I mean, we knew that he wasn't very popular, and yet he carried on, a man who supposedly has no vanity whatsoever, he carried on. Should he have stepped down before the campaign? Should he step down right now?
Look, we've lost the election. So to answer that question, I mean, a lot of us, I resigned from the shadow cabinet because I could see this coming. I was knocking on doors here. This was not going to work.
Did you shout about it?
I resigned from the shadow cabinet. I said this wasn't going to work. And then we had 2017, and what I felt happened there, we sort of got drunk, intoxicated on the increase in the vote share, great successes in sort of urban, liberal city seats, while ignoring the fact that we had a shock. So actually, I lost more votes, or about a similar number of votes last time. Why on earth did we? I remember calling the leaders up and saying, we need to do something about the coalfield communities. Back then, it's not working. They don't like us. And then we decided to ignore their voices on Brexit. I mean, did we think they were just going to say, do you know about that vote, love? Don't you worry about that.
OK,
it's
let
fine.
me read you this,
you can
let me
ignore
read you
us.
this quote from John Lansman, the head of Momentum. He said, I think back in the summer, winning is the small bit that matters to political elites, says the head of Momentum a few months ago. So actually, for many people in the Labour Party, this defeat doesn't matter to them as much as the purity of staying in opposition.
Well, purity doesn't take a single child out of child poverty. And I tell you that, as somebody who grew up in child poverty, the last time that the Labour Party in the 80s, when the last time the Labour parties in the 70s and 80s were having ideological arguments while kids like me suffered, and you know, I listened to YVETTE there, and he was talking about, you know, the great success of Boris winning in those coalfield seats. I would just issue a word of warning to them too, because I've looked at some of the figures. The Tory vote went up a bit. It was the Labour vote, though, that collapsed. So I would warn them not to get too drunk on this either. The Labour Party let people down.
In 10 seconds, Gloria, is the Labour Party now split irredeemably, whatever happens next?
No, and it mustn't do. And just as quickly as I can, the Labour Party in the past has gone, when it's come to choose a leader, heart or head. I think you can do both, but you can't have somebody from London, and I would urge Lisa Nandy, I don't know what her plans are, I would urge Lisa Nandy from Wigan to go for it.